first and foremost, like you should absolutely, if you have an idea and you want to apply. But I think what could set you out from 80% of the other applicants is having progress or traction, having a product built. If it's in a market where you can have it built, having customers using it, it shows like you're serious about doing it. The second thing is, and this is something that is so obvious and everybody says it, but after reading some of my previous failed applications, I failed at this, is read the freaking question and answer the question on one of the Techstars ones. I think YC is the same. It's like, what's the problem you're solving? So look at the question and just take a breath and a second to say, like, am I answering the question or am I talking about my product and the solution? Typically is the issue.
On today's show, I'm talking with Tom Griffiths, co-founder of Gale Payments. From the outset of his career, Tom knew that he wanted to found his own startup. He applied to several pre-accelerators, then accelerators, to help him start to form some shape to that dream. Most recently, he went through Techstars in Dallas. And in our interview, I dig into not only his perspective on the world of startups and being a founder more generally, but we also do a deeper dive into accelerators more specifically. They're an often discussed part of the startup journey, but honestly, they're a bit of a mystery, right? I mean, who are they helpful for? How do you ensure your application is compelling? What about equity dilution and loss of control? Well, Tom helps us navigate the pros and cons of what can be a very effective tool for founders to grow their businesses in the early stages. He breaks it down in a really relatable and practical way. So if you're looking at accelerators as a path for your startup, this episode is packed full of information you won't want to miss. All right, here's my interview with Tom. All right. Hey, Tom, thanks so much for being with us today. I appreciate it, man. Thanks for taking the time.
Awesome. Great to be here.
Great. Well, let's just start moving right through these questions. Let's dig right in. First, I mean, building a business, doing your own thing, entrepreneurship is hard, right? Building a business from scratch is hard. So why do that? Why not a more traditional route? What about that worked for you?
It's hard to pinpoint exactly, but I think when you're an entrepreneur, you just kind of know you're an entrepreneur. I've been building various types of businesses since being in college, since graduating from college, building things on the side outside of work. And I also worked in startups for the past 8 years here in the US, specifically knowing that at some point I'd like to start a startup.
Yeah. So, I mean, I totally agree that like, if you know, sometimes that's definitely the case. And you don't always take the leap, but I think from very early, a lot of people know that they're just built that way. And I think sometimes when they go into a more traditional environment, that's usually affirmed. You're like, oh, yep, not cut from this cloth. It's just a matter of when you take the leap.
That's exactly it. I think one quick thing there is when you're working at a startup or you're a founder of an early stage startup, like you can just go and do something and deliver value quickly. When you work in like large corporations, there's nothing wrong with this, or like larger, more established companies. It can take, a committee or weeks or months to actually build something. So you can do a lot more things and see, your work in the wild instantly working at startups. It's really cool.
For sure. When I would meet, as you know, I worked for Disney, and whenever I'd meet up with my old team, I was like, guys, it's amazing. I just like, if I have a decision, I just like make the decision. And they're like, what? Yeah.
Like we just launched a new website. It took us 2 weeks from start to finish.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. That's definitely the good. There's pros and cons. It's definitely a pro. So as you've been doing that, working for different startups that you've created or startups that others have created, I mean, as you've built that professional experience, what's a gospel truth, something that you like a core belief that you've had to reshape, rethink as you've built that experience?
Yeah, I think of the phrase "move fast and break things." So I think when I've worked at later stage startups and larger companies, certain things really matter, like making sure the UI or the UX is perfect and spending a little bit, a lot of extra time, like making the brand UI perfect. I think when you work at an early stage startup, especially as a founder, you're doing sales, you're doing support, you're doing onboarding, you're doing product, you're doing product design, and you're doing legal work, a whole host of things. So you have to move fast, and you have to be willing to ship stuff that, you may not be necessarily proud of. And then I'll talk out both sides of my mouth. I think it's a balance. Like, I love craft. I love putting extra effort into like product design and building delightful experiences. But you have to kind of balance that as an early stage company. What matters to us is essentially building a delightful product and then acquiring customers in order to say there's actually a real business here.
For sure. So what was it like? Did you start knowing those things, or as you grew in your career, did some of that start to take shape and you believe something else, thinking like, no, I'm going to go, a mile deep and an inch wide when you really had to go wider? I mean, what did you have to reevaluate of that?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. My first sort of venture backable startup, I spent far too long focusing on like building the brand. I built the website, beautiful website, spent a lot of time building the UI, and those are all great things, but we hadn't acquired a customer yet. We didn't have a letter of intent, a wait list, anything like that. So we didn't prove that people needed the product. Absolutely, probably the most beautiful website in the industry, and web app in that entire industry, certainly in the States. But none of that mattered because it was, you've got to be able to acquire customers. So on our current startup, Gale, we built our initial, pre-customer website in a day. Like, it was about like, let's get a landing page up, let's get a sign up form up, and let's move fast. Was it something I would hold up and be proud of like the other website? No, but it was a start, and now we've gone back to clean it up later. So it is really balancing like craft and speed.
It totally is. And I mean, it's such a balance, delivering with excellence, but delivering with speed, and what your customers are going to require, what your potential customers are going to require, versus like, well, this is all they need just to like find that fit. I mean, it's a hard balance. As you've grown experience in the whole startup and founding world, I mean, as you think about other founders, what's a question that you think that founders need to be asking, but don't ask often enough?
One thing I particularly struggled with is asking for help. So when you meet with people, like, you're always one person away from whatever it is you need. Do you need a customer, like a B2B customer? That person has a network, that has their own network. So I'd say know what you need and know your asks. Is it partnerships? Is it hiring? Is it customer acquisition? Or whatever it might be. And just know what those things are, and just ask people. If you don't ask people, you'll never know. Even if you're just meeting a friend or someone for a coffee, like, oh, I actually know the C-suite person of that company. I can introduce you. So I think just asking. My original way was just, and you have to have this, but I'll just work my way and have the work ethic, and I can grit my way to doing things. Whereas just asking people for help in whatever areas you need, I think is huge.
Yeah, for sure. I was given that advice early. I remember going in, it was to Disney, and I was meeting with somebody who was connected to my alumni network at my school. And somebody said, hey, when you go in there, make sure that you have an answer if they ask you how they can help. Like, if make sure that you ask for help and then have an answer, essentially what it was. And because if you have a great conversation and they're willing to connect you or help, and you're like, and you waffle on that and don't have a way they can help, it's not like they're going to follow up later and be like, hey, I really thought more about how I could help, and here's how I can help. So like, I went into that first conversation with that person who ended up being was the CTO of Parks and Resorts, who was connected to Baylor, where I graduated from. And she said, we had a nice 10-minute chat, and she goes, how can I help? And I said, well, like, I'm glad I was given that advice. Here's 4, and I had 4 job postings. I gave them to her. She goes, oh, that one's my area. She called the hiring manager, and I got the internship. Like, but if I would have been like, oh, I don't know, we both went to Baylor. I thought it'd be fun to connect. There's no way she can actually help. So that's really good advice. I totally resonate with that and agree.
I think a lot of people on that, like, they think not knowing the answer or like asking for help is like is a sign of weakness. I know certainly like when you're in the corporate environment, you're in a meeting room, like always asking questions is actually a good thing rather than like a sign of weakness. So.
Yep, for sure. And I think the right leaders see that. And the right people around you see that willingness to ask questions is not a sign of weakness, but the opposite. If you could, again, as you just gain experience and live more in this world, as you've been able to see more of what's real and what's not, if you could debunk a myth about startups, what would that be?
I think for a while here, startups became, and they still are to some extent, they became really cool and glamorous. And I think the amount of people and the amount of people starting startups and the amount of founders grew sort of right before that 2020 time period very substantially. And it became really cool to start a company. I think actually in reality, I've always known I wanted to start a startup. Like we mentioned earlier, in reality, it's really hard work. It's lonely. You have to put in the work. If you get an inbound lead at 10:30 p.m. at night, you're getting out of bed if you're not on your laptop and you're responding to that lead. Like there's nobody else there to bail you out. So it's a tremendous, very, very rewarding. If you really have the desire and the determination to do one, I would 100% recommend it, but I wouldn't recommend it to everybody. Like go work at an early stage startup or, go work at a corporate job and you can work really hard and deliver value that way. But I think one thing is startups are super fun. They are super rewarding, but they're also extremely hard work. It's not all glamour.
No, it's not. And I mean, it is really, really tough to cut through that facade of like, oh yeah, it's amazing. I set my own time. I set my own calendar. I'm my own boss. I have a 4-hour work week. Like you hear a lot of that garbage around and it's really tough to cut through. That's part of why I started this show is like, let's peel back the layers of that a bit. I mean, as I get started in my own startup journey, that's just what you hear. You just hear so much of that glamour and my couple years of experience here with my own thing. I'm like, well, that's not real. Like there's a lot more complexity to running your own business and being the only guy in the room. And like, especially here at the beginning. And so to cut through a lot of that is really helpful. So that's really helpful insight, I think, for people. What's something about the startup world that you think needs to change?
I think I hear a lot of investors and a lot of folks saying they invest in team, but it's interesting. I don't actually get a lot of questions from many of the folks I speak to about team or background. And I think one thing that I think needs to change, I do see a lot of folks talking about this and a lot of investors addressing this, but is underdog or underrepresented founders getting an opportunity, getting the education. So it's not your sort of typical top tier college grads or dropouts, starting a company from that position, understanding the story and where the founder came from. Like maybe that founder started their company not at 21 because, they had parents to take care of or something like that. So I think more around like helping underdog, underrepresented founders who haven't had as much opportunity as other founders.
That's really great. I think a lot of people will find that really insightful. Let me move from the more general startup and what your experience has been there to accelerators. Your and my first connection, Tom, was a mutual connection of ours. I was starting in this whole startup world, and you were like, "Oh, I know Tom, and he's done accelerators before, and I know you're interested in that." So that was our initial connection, and I'd love to press more into that because it's a really it's unique to the startup world, and there's a lot of nuance to it and a lot of misunderstanding around it. So if we were to start peeling back those layers, accelerators are not required as a startup. A lot of startups don't go through that process. So what did you know, and you've done them? Tell me a little bit more about what you've done, the accelerators you've done, and why you knew that was the right path for you and your companies.
Yeah, I think I'll start with if you're unsure, do a pre-accelerator. I did Founder University by Launch, Jason Calacanis's fund. I did Y Combinator Startup School. Those two are somewhat similar. The first thing they do is they connect you to a community of founders. So you have people to push you to, when you're seeing their progress. And, a community of courses on things like how to build a data room, how to fundraise, building an MVP. You should build your MVP as fast as possible. It shouldn't take 12 months to build an MVP in most cases. And those are general ways to, another one that really helps us is Founder School by Edricio de la Cruz. That was the one that really gave us the push. That one was much more curated and personalized.
Well, and you called that a pre-accelerator. Explain that a bit. What's the definition of that?
Yeah, so they take no equity typically. This is just typical, no equity in your company. That they're not curated normally for like if you join a Techstars or a Y Combinator, you're one of a few companies. They are writing a check in your company. And they're giving you tailored personal advice. They have courses and things like general fundraising courses, but you have mentors and advisors who are like, hey, this is what you, Tom Griffiths at Gale, need to focus on. And I'm going to check in with you next week. Pre-accelerator is more like there's no equity. They typically accept Y Combinator Startup School is open to a lot of folks. Founder University has a large cohort, whereas the actual Launch Accelerator accepts a handful of companies and write a check. And they're just sort of before you're ready, let's say you're pre-revenue, especially pre-accelerators are great for making sure you're building your MVP, you're going live, you're talking to customers, you're doing all of that stuff.
So you're still applying, you're still getting accepted. It's still somewhat structured program, but you're just not giving equity and you don't have specific mentors walking you through. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. That's roughly it. Each one's slightly different. Like I said, with Startup School and Agrizio's, he's more hand selecting. He's doing the actual weekly classes, but they typically don't expect you to be full-time. I took all of those with a full-time job. Once or twice a week, you'd have a class on a certain topic, and it's usually in the order of coming up with an idea, testing your idea with customers, building an MVP, and they just walk you through the process in a very general way. And that's a really good way to come up to speed with things okay, I need product market fit. I need to go talk to customers. I need to build product fast. So really the basics of building a company. When you have a product, typically, and you have traction, that's when I would consider whether an accelerator is right for you. And at that point, they're obviously going to invest into your company, and they typically require you to be full-time on your business at that point.
I've definitely heard that. As we talk about that, as we think about, an accelerator, whether you've done a pre-accelerator as you were kind of describing it, or you're jumping right in, you decide that's the right next step for your business, that application process, certainly for me, can feel daunting. It's there's, some of the bigger ones, Y Combinator and stuff, there are people who make a living off curriculum of how you get accepted. And it feels super daunting. So talk me through that process of your own and what the application process was like. And then try to, if you could, share some of the hidden pieces maybe that are this is what is helpful if you're looking to get accepted, or some of those tips and tricks.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you should absolutely, if you have an idea and you want to apply. But I think what could set you out from 80% of the other applicants is having progress or traction.
Yeah.
So you like, hey, look, like we
Meaning
are
like selling products, having revenue.
having a product built. If it's if it's in a market where you can have it built, having customers using it, it shows like you're serious about doing it, and you're up against like the top startup founders, right, in the country. The second thing is, and this is something that is so obvious and everybody says it, but after reading some of my previous failed applications, I failed at this, is read the freaking question and like answer. And it's like the question on one of the Techstars ones, I think YC is the same. It's like, what's the problem you're solving? And like the first sentence would be like, we're an HSA payments company. It's like paying with HSA is difficult. And then start talking about our solution. We're so used to doing. It's like, no, you need to go into detail. The next question is asking about how are you fixing the problem?
Right.
How are you solving the problem? So look at the question and just take a breath and a second to say, like, am I answering the question or am I talking about my product and the solution? Typically is the issue, because you're really educating someone who knows less about your space than you do, who's reading the application form. So I think that's one of the key, really simple things. Another like thing is for Techstars specifically, Y Combinator is as well. They have former founders saying, hey, it's time to submit. If you want me to read your application, I'm happy to do it. Send it. Techstars have something similar where some of the managing directors walk you through the form in like webinars. So keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. I took that, I changed the answer to my questions on quite a few, and it helped us get into Techstars. So
that's really, really good. Yeah, it's so funny. You live and breathe your solution, your space, your market. You have all this information, and you just start talking like you assume everybody else has it too. And I've definitely heard that as I've looked around at like what are people looking for in applications, and people that are either like partners at these firms or they've gone through the process before, whatever. They'll say like, you would just be so surprised how many people don't answer the question that we ask them. So
yeah, that was me.
That's really funny. Oh man. So as you got, so tell me what accelerator you're in now.
Yeah, we just completed Techstars. Techstars
just
physical
completed
health.
Techstars. Awesome. Cool. How long was that process with Techstars?
The application process takes a few months.
No, the actual accelerator.
The accelerator, 3 months, 13 weeks.
3 months. Okay. And so as you know, founders, we just laid it all out of like, you wear every hat, you're incredibly busy. Often it's just you and maybe one or two other people, already overwhelmed. Finding the time to apply and give thoughtful answers might be tricky enough for some people to get their head around, let alone, okay, 3 months. Like I'm going to give up 3 months. I'm going to go all in for some of these more in-depth accelerators. That can feel super daunting. I mean, walk me through your mindset around that of like, how were you able to give up 3 precious months, and what was the value of it? Was it worth it? The trade-offs?
Yeah, I think personally, I 100% think it was worth it for us and our company and where we are at. And I would recommend it. You have to look at each founder's and startup situation to see if you think it's worth it. I'd definitely, before you apply for an accelerator, say, what do I want to get out of this? Because like you said, you're giving up a large chunk of equity for, in theory, less than you could give up if you just go straight to fundraising. But I totally think it's worth it. It is a large time commitment. I think the biggest thing for us is both my co-founder and I, he had twins on the way and a 3-year-old. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and we have to quit our jobs.
You guys are in the thick of it. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
$120K check from Techstars to keep us going. So, that's a big jump to take. Paying yourself a minimal amount, living off savings and whatnot.
Yep.
And then in terms of the work, so most accelerators, they deliberately build the program with time built in to build your company.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, you have some programming and whatnot, and there are weeks like at Techstars, we have mentor magic, where from, I think, 10 a.m. till 4 p.m., you're in back-to-back calls with mentors. You meet with I think it's about 50 mentors over that week. And like, you still have to build your business. So you can't just take a break of building your business. So like what we did is probably wouldn't recommend this. Is we'd wake up at 3 a.m. We'd go into our co-working Techstars space, get there about 3:30, 4, and we'd have almost a full work day before Mentor Madness started. And I wanted to do it before because I knew after speaking to 8 people in one day in back-to-back meetings, you know, your brain would be cooked.
Yeah, totally.
So that's why you have to know that this is something you want to do, right? And you have to say like, yes, this is something I want to do. I could be sitting in actually getting paid a real salary in a real job in another startup, but you have to want to do this. So in that week in particular, it's like you have to have a full work day before the work day starts in order to make progress.
That certainly goes back to what you were saying earlier of like, you got to make sure that this is the cloth you're cut from. This is what you want to do. It's not something that you think you should do, or your dad did it, and so you want to do what he did. Like it can't, whatever. It needs to be something you want to do for you, because the rubber will meet the road. You will hit crossroads throughout the experience, and you need to have that resolve. Makes sense.
On a daily basis, you'll run into existential threats to the business. You have to deal with on a daily basis.
Right.
Ups and downs, you know, like we'll make a sale 1 minute, we'll make a sale 1 minute, and the next minute there's like a massive existential problem.
Yep.
Then you solve it, and then you're just like, okay, now we have to move on to the next biggest issue.
For sure.
It's really fun, really rewarding, but you know, like you said, you have to really want to do this to do it.
Yeah, you hear founders talk, and what you'll hear a lot is when they talk honestly, it's like, this is a grind, this is hard. You wear every hat, you're up at 10:30 following up on a lead, but it's really great, and I would recommend it if you're really into it. And it's funny how that is. I think just the highs are high enough that they even out the lows and the stressful points.
When I speak to other founders and some of the pre-accelerators and whatnot that we've done, and it's like, oh, I'm not sure if I want to go get my MBA or if I want to build a company, whether this is right or wrong, I always say like, go do your MBA. If you're wondering whether you should or shouldn't build a company, it's like someone has to like convince you that's a good idea. Like, go do the other thing. And like, you can always start a business later, but I'll always say they're like leaning on the fence whether they should or shouldn't do it. But then I'll say, go do the other thing. And if they're really compelled to do it, to build a startup, then they should go do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's like, I'm sure it's not a blanket advice for everybody, but a general rule of thumb is interesting to think like, if nothing can stop you from building this company, and people are like trying to like convince you otherwise, and you're like, nothing will stop me from building it, that's probably the right moment that you're ready to move things forward. So that's interesting. One other thought on accelerators is, you know, another thing that can be, you know, as you weigh out pros and cons of an experience like that, we've touched on a couple of times, but the equity dilution, other loss of control, other things, you know, you don't have as much of your day available to yourself. You're meeting with mentors, you're following up on, you know, quote unquote homework that they have for you to deliver on the next week. Then of course, not to mention, you're giving up percentages of your company. How did you, in your experience, weigh those things out and decide in the end that was still the right move? And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can only speak specifically for Techstars and what that has done for us and what it continues to do for us. So when you weigh up the pros and cons, for us, it was the mentorship and some of the folks that we got to work directly with. All of this really comes into the network, to be honest with you, the Techstars network. So there's thousands of companies that have gone through Techstars. Many of our early customers were Techstars companies. So customers,
because of the connection through Techstars.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, hey, I'm a new Techstars company. You're a potential customer. Would you like to consider HSA, FSA payments?
You come with almost like a stamp of quality of like,
you help out other people in the network. I know other accelerators are like that too. So some of our early customers were Techstars. That alone made it worth it. The mentorship, the mentors that we've met, has definitely made it worth it. And then there's thousands of founders and companies that have gone through Techstars, where it's like, you know, like I said, you're always one person away from whatever it is, whether it's an investor introduction, a customer introduction. So there's thousands, and we're in fintech and the health tech and e-commerce space because we're payments for e-commerce stores, specifically like health savings account payments. It's like there's fintech founders that are one step ahead of us. They're at their Series A. We're at our seed stage. It's like, they've gone through what we've gone through. So I think the power of the network was the key thing for us when we joined Techstars. Like I said,
and that was worth the giving up percentages of your company. You're just saying that like the vaulting forward that allowed for in our progress was worth what we gave up.
Yeah, we wouldn't be where we are now. No doubt in my mind. And like, even for us as well, like I said, we weren't full time. We were mornings, evenings, weekends. And that small check allowed us to, get a little bit of runway and go full time. And we went from, 1x speed to 10x speed all of a sudden. So it accelerated us, right? It did exactly what it said it would. Yeah.
This is more of just like an off the cuff question, but tell me either through just your own thought or other companies that you've seen that you were able to observe and say, well, Accelerator was not the right step for you. That doesn't feel like the right move. What kind of advice could you give for if you're this kind of company or this kind of person or whatever, that might not be the right step?
Yeah, it's a tough one because it's so specific. I think you have to look at that accelerator. Like there are some accelerators that are very good in niche markets, let's say insurance or something. So you have to look at like the pros and cons for your business. I think not all the time, because I know second time founders that often go through the same accelerator because they got so much value. Yeah, but sometimes, maybe you're a second time founder. You've already been through, let's say, Techstars, and you're part of the Techstars network already. Then like maybe that'd be a reason. Maybe it could be you're further along and you could go straight into a fundraising process. It's really specific. I think
that was one of my thoughts was like, could it be that you are far enough along that an accelerator just wouldn't bring the value that you need?
I think so, but you're always going to get folks that like buck that trend and they joined an accelerator late. And there's numerous examples, or like the same thing with the second time founder. I know a second time founder that went through a very notable startup accelerator twice. They just got so much value out of it, and they wanted mentors on this specific business. So yeah, it's a difficult one. I think it's so individual. For the most part, if you're an early stage startup, I think a good accelerator is worth up the equity.
Yeah, and I imagine that going through the application process would help vet that answer. Like if you're doing, you would go through that process, and either you just wouldn't be accepted because they go through however many thousands and thousands of companies and understand what the right fit is. But as you answer some of those questions, that might flesh itself out that like, okay, this isn't the right next step for us.
Exactly. Another one is one that I think you could blanket apply is as you're filling out the application, like, are you a venture backable business? Can you be a $10 billion company? And do you want to go that route for yourself personally? Because I think, we've chatted before, but once you're on that treadmill, it's hard to get off. And like, is your business actually venture backable? Because that's what accelerators are looking for.
Yep. Right. Exactly. Well, that's some great insight on accelerators, specifically going into kind of your experience. I appreciate you walking us through that. Let me go into a couple closing questions here that I think will be insightful just more generally. All right, Tom, imagine that you woke up at the start of your career. You have all the knowledge and experience that you have now, but you only have $1,000 in a laptop. What would you spend that first week doing of your fresh start?
I mean, I would definitely start building a business. I'm in two minds of whether I think I would learn how to code.
Ooh, nice. Yep.
Yeah, I might run out of the $1,000 before I'm a coder. But I think I would build a business and learn how to code.
Why do you say learn how to code? Has that just been a real, is that just been a bottleneck for you as you've built?
Yeah, I think when you're building a technology company, and you can definitely have a tech co-founder. When you're building a technology company, like not knowing how to code is a massive disadvantage. Even if you're taking like the CEO or business or sales, it can slow you down massively. Even just building an MVP and things like that. And obviously you've got AI and Vercel, V0, VO. And tools now, but I think I would learn how to code. And I always had the excuse of like, oh, well, now I'm at a point in my career where I'm actually getting paid more than like a junior or starter engineer. It doesn't make sense to do like the code boot camp. And every single time I've said that, and I've like tried to build one of the various startups I've built, it's like the technical side and the coding.
Like, I could have used that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I should have just done it. I should have done it then. I should have done it then. And still now I look back and it's like, I should have done it. So I think that's like a regret. But yeah, I'd probably go through a pre-accelerator, start looking at ideas and start building an MVP.
Start coding, start learning to code. I think that's great advice. I know basics. I took a couple courses after school, built some websites, like tried to get my hands on code for that same reason. Like, well, I'm not going to code for my career, but when I eventually build what I know will be like, that's just my passion, a technology project. I should know how it works. And so I know basics, but going through my last project where I built a mobile app, I understand like if then logic, like I can at least, but I didn't have a technical co-founder and there were a lot of technical holes that I didn't see them coming. Like they were building it incorrectly. The architecture was wrong. And I didn't know that. I couldn't see that. But if I would have known the code more intimately, I could have seen that and stopped a lot of heartache.
With single founders who are non-technical, I've been there, but that's often an issue is like you outsource it, you spend a lot of money building something that ultimately the chances are it doesn't work. And you need to be able to pivot. Like you build an MVP, you get feedback and you keep building. So with $1,000 in my pocket in this scenario, no way without a technical co-founder or building it myself, like you're going to spend tens of thousands of dollars building your product with no guarantee that people actually want it. And I've been there. I've made that mistake. I've done that.
Awesome. Well, let's finish up with this one here, Tom. Share with my listeners, what's one tool, quote, or book that you found indispensable for you, either personally or professionally?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think one thing that sort of came to mind as you were asking that, and it's something I've read fairly recently and then reread and listened to the audiobook on, is we have an advisor, Edricio de la Cruz. He sold his business to MasterCard. He has a book called The Underdog Founder. And it's both his story of building a startup and having gone through Y Combinator and his childhood all the way through to exit with guidance on how to build a startup. So you get the story, the unbelievable story of his life and background building a startup. And all the adversity he faced. Whenever I have a bad day, I just think back to that book. I can get through this. With real tangible startup lesson, I would 100% recommend that book. Even if you're not necessarily an underdog founder, it's inspirational and educational at the same time.
Awesome. Well, that's great. The Underdog Founder. I'll put that in the show notes for sure. Tom, I appreciate your time today. Thanks for walking us through that. That was extremely valuable. I know for me, as I'm like just here at the start and looking at these paths, that was really valuable for me. And I know it will be for my listeners as well. So thank you for doing that, for sharing your perspective.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Brandon. Appreciate it, man.
You bet. Thanks, Tom.